Last week was a tough one for the British Prime Minister. Her Brexit deal was rejected by MPs and she faced a confidence vote which she won. It appears Britons know they do not need another general election at the moment, but they certainly want a better exit deal with the European Union. Prime Minister Theresa May has a few days to come up with a new deal, or Britain stands the risk of crashing out of the European Union.
British Prime Minister Theresa May spent much of the previous week trying to convince British MPs to support a Brexit deal. But when it was put to the vote, her appeals fell flat. Unfazed, she carried on courageously, even though it looked the end of the road for her political future.
I believe that if we fail to deliver on what the British people instructed us to do in the vote of the referendum, that the views of the British people, of this House, of Parliament and of politicians will be at an all-time low, because they will have lost faith in politicians across the whole of this Parliament.
The rest of Europe, confused as to the way forward for Britain, called on the Prime Minister to chart an early course forward. Even they were cautious of their future with or without Britain.
Great Britain is a part of Europe. We have a great cooperation with Great Britain for all interior and security matters, and Great Britain must stay a close partner in the future. But of course we have to respect if Great Britain no longer wants to be a member of the European Union. But we also have a responsibility to shape a divorce process so that people don't shake their heads at us in 50 years' time and say, why weren't they in a position to make a compromise?
Denn ich glaube, Deutschland braucht eine starke CDU.
What I notice is that on March 30th of the hard Brexit should happen again. We will be ready. We will be ready. Construction work will have to be completed. The recruitment will have to be done. The procedures will have been put in place or adopted if they already exist. In order for this hard Brexit to take place in the best conditions for our fellow citizens.
The European Union, which has insisted there would be no change to the deadline on Brexit, softened its stance, saying it could extend Brexit deadline if London provides good reason.
There has been no UK request for an extension. Should there be a UK request to extend, setting out the reasons for such an extension, it will be a matter for the EU 27 to decide by unanimity. We are always ready to meet and to talk, but the European Council, in its Article 50 formation, said in December that the withdrawal agreement, and I repeat, the withdrawal agreement agreed by the 27 in the United Kingdom, is not open for renegotiation.
The Labour Party, whose leader tabled a vote of no confidence in the House, which Mrs May won, later said it could back a second Brexit referendum if its proposals for leaving the EU are shunned by the government and a no-deal scenario looks likely.
She seems to be prepared to send the country hurtling towards a cliff edge. To get a deal that can command a majority in Parliament, Theresa May has to ditch the red lines and get serious about proposals for the future. Last night's offer of talks with party leaders turned out to be simply a stunt, not a serious attempt to engage with a new reality that is needed. No sooner had she said the words in Parliament than the government confirmed that she would not take no deal off the table. So I say to the Prime Minister again, I'm quite happy to talk, but the starting point for any talks about Brexit must be that the threat of a disastrous no-deal outcome is ruled out, taken off the table, and we can talk about the future of the plans that we will put forward and the future relationship with Europe. But take no deal off the table now, please, Prime Minister.
But he's not the only one bringing the fire on Theresa May. Former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson thinks Britain should go back to Brussels to renegotiate a Brexit divorce deal without a backstop plan to avoid a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland.
All this vacuous talk of extending Article 50 is dishonest, but of course it's also weakening our negotiating position once again. I think it would be absolutely preposterous if we were to find ourselves now obliged to pay yet more to recruit candidates for the next elections to the European Parliament, simply because we haven't got on with leaving the EU. And I think the public would have the strong and altogether justified impression of an elite conspiracy to thwart Brexit. To extend Article 50 now would do nothing but erode trust in politics.
But as Mrs May considers options on a new deal, many Britons are divided on the country leaving the EU.
I don't think it's an agreement that moves Brexit any closer to what anybody wants. It's only the first part of a leap into the unknown that is still unknown. And we have no plan B, we have no plan A.
Since the referendum in 2016, when she came to be Prime Minister, she's not listened to anyone. She's just shown contempt for the 48% that voted to remain. She's called us saboteurs and enemies of the people. She doesn't listen to people even within her own party, like Anna Soubry. So I've got not much faith in Theresa May. I've not got much faith in many of the politicians at the moment.
Well, I don't really know. I don't really know. I just feel better, more happier when we come out of Europe and we set our own goals, we do what's good for our country, which we haven't been doing. We've been doing what's been good for Europe. And unfortunately, I don't think Europe are as strong as us, so I think we will go beyond them.
Brexit is only weeks away, and the likelihood that Britain will make a soft Brexit seems quite unlikely. Only relentless hard work and sheer determination can get the country to follow through on Article 50 if it chooses to leave the EU.
While the world watches developments unfold in the UK, many have wondered how the UK will adjust to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world to the UK without the EU.
Beginning with the United States, whose President Donald Trump was all for the UK leaving the EU. But the US President is reported to have said last year that the UK government's proposal for its future relationship with the EU would probably kill any US-UK free trade deal in the future. Nothing much is expected to change in the UK's relations with other countries, especially as it concerns trade. According to the UK White Paper, a proposal on customs would enable the UK set its own tariffs and vary them as it chooses, independently of the tariffs the EU applies, meaning the UK could have much lower tariffs with the US than the EU does. Mrs May has said there will be no limit to the possibility of the UK doing trade deals around the rest of the world once it leaves the EU. Some analysts believe Britain can have greater global influence outside of the European Union. According to Mark Grant, contributing to Forbes magazine, Britain's international standing has never depended on its membership of the European Union. He says it is rather a factor of its economic weight, history, culture, democratic values, the excellence of its institutions such as the universities and armed forces, the royal family, and all the other trappings of its soft power. He also said that recent polling by the British Council confirms that young people outside Europe do not see Brexit as a negative development and that Britain's influence needs to be nurtured now more than ever. As for its relations with the United States, ties between the US and Europe have been strained in the era of President Trump, who has departed from many long-standing tenets of US foreign policy to embrace a go-it-alone approach in the world. But according to the Washington Post, in the areas where interests remain aligned, diplomats and leaders on both sides of the Atlantic say that Americans will find it harder to exert their will inside a 27-nation bloc that will be among the richest in the world.
When we return after the break, we'll be talking to political analyst Dr. Sam Amadi on the possibility of the UK leaving the European Union and how this would affect her relations with the rest of the world. Stay with us.